Should you be buying the Kilkerran Heavily Peated or the Longrow Peated? We're going to find out today. I'm Jeff. This is G Whiskey. Stick around. Okay, so should you be buying the Kilkerran Heavily Peated or the Longrow Peated? That is our question of the day. I have been sitting on these bottles for a while now. I mean, figuratively, not. And I don't know why it's taken me so long to review them. So today will be like a double review / comparison. Longrow, as I'm sure many of you guys know, is the peated distillate out of Springbank. And Kilkerran Heavily Peated is out of the Glengyle distillery about 50 meters away, which is also owned by Springbank. The Kilkerran that I've got here is batch 7. That one came out in 2022, so it is not new. I hear the newer ones are better, but this is what we're working with today. And our Longrow here is a batch from 2023. Both of these bottles are favorites among peat lovers. Not only are they very peaty, but they also offer that farmy Campbeltown funk. They're slightly coastal. And if you're a purist, neither of these has been tainted by too much quote-unquote grape juice. Granted, both of these have seen some level of sherry maturation. They're both matured in both bourbon and sherry casks, but for both, substantially more bourbon. The Kilkerran is matured in 90% bourbon casks and 10% sherry casks. The Longrow, I don't think they tell us, but these are definitely going to be peat and distillate dominated whiskeys. So again, great ones for the purists. Now, the big difference between these two bottles is that the Kilkerran is cask strength while the Longrow is not. What else? Kilkerran peated at 84 ppm, which is a lot, and the Longrow between 50 and 55 ppm. Our Longrow is probably around 6 to 8 years old. The Kilkerran, especially this batch from 2022, would be younger, around 5 years maybe, but that's a guess. And yeah, I think that's it. Peated Campbeltown head-to-head today. This one should be fun. I will compare, I'll contrast, and I'll let you know which one comes out on top for me. So let's jump into it. In the meantime, if you'll kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. For specs, our Longrow comes in at 46% ABV, and our Kilkerran comes in at 59.1% ABV, which definitely will make a difference. As with all Springbank / Glengyle products, these are both non-chill filtered and natural color. For look, we have pretty basic presentations for both of these bottles, and I'll be honest, I don't love them. They're very stripped back, which I guess does match the whiskey, the style of whiskey that we're getting, but I'll give them both 2.5 out of 5. These both say non-chill filtered, they say natural color. The Longrow even goes so far as to explain what Scotch mist is, which I think is great. These don't have loads of info, but they do have all the info that we need, so well done. We'll start with the Longrow, which has a very bright nose. We get bright citrus, ginger, malt, vanilla, some drying oak, and some salty coastal notes. The palate and finish give us a nice texture. The arrival is an intense but measured combination of peat, spice, and vanilla. We get really nice brown sugar, honey, and cereal notes, kind of like a Honey Nut Cheerios type thing. And our finish is medium to long on barley, cereals, brown sugar, and some pink pepper. The nose of the Kilkerran gives us more intensity. We get honey first and then some citrus behind it. Then we get a touch of sour pineapple and some minerals. There's definitely a little bit more youth behind this one. For the palate and finish, without water, this hits big. The arrival is intense on spice, ashy peat, soot, and charcoal. Then we move on to some pineapple, some green apple, some lemon lime. There's some ginger in here, like ginger ale. There are plenty of vanilla and brown sugar notes in here. This one gives us a long finish with malt, peat, and citrus. Okay, so I think both of these whiskeys are very good, and I think they're both very honest. Both are relatively young, mostly distillate-driven, peat-forward Campbeltown whiskeys. You get what you sign up for. And there is plenty of overlap here. You may prefer one, I think most would, but you're not going to absolutely love one and absolutely hate the other. I can't really imagine that happening. They do a lot of the same things. Now, obviously, the biggest difference between these two bottles is that difference in ABV, and the higher ABV one will be more attractive to a lot of you out there. I don't think it necessarily needs to be all about ABV, but there's a good chunk of you that'll just see that 59.1% and be like, okay, yeah, that's the one. You know who you are. And that's fine. If you're looking for more intensity, of course, the Kilkerran will be the better option. We do get more intensity there, but as I often say in my videos, and as I often say to my girlfriend, bigger doesn't always mean better, okay? There's other factors to consider. Personally, I'm more focused on the actual flavors of the whiskey, and there's a couple reasons for that. A, I'm pretentious, and B, I don't always think that louder is better. Which is why when I was making my notes for this side-by-side, I tried the two together where both were neat, and I tried one where I watered the Kilkerran down to about the same ABV as the Longrow, and in both situations, my conclusion was I prefer the Longrow. Now, keep in mind, this batch 7 is from 3 years ago. I think we're up to batch 11 now. I hear the more recent batches are better, and that makes sense. They would be older. But this one is the younger of the two whiskeys, and it tastes younger. Not in a bad way, but it just is. Now, one thing to understand is that I am coming in with my own biases. Everyone does, and I've never been a big fan of those really youthful, young, loud peat monster type whiskeys. I usually prefer a lighter touch of peat or older peated expressions or a peated whiskey with an interesting bit of cask play, hopefully nothing too overbearing, but something that complements the distillate nicely. That's more my speed. And because of that, I do lean more towards the Longrow. I think it tastes more mature, it's sweeter, and overall just more put together. The peat, the barley, the vanillas, the ginger, the fruit, they've all had time to sort of get along and settle in together. As for the Kilkerran, delicious distillate, more on tart fruits like green apples and unripe pineapples, and we do get a metallic tinge in the finish. And I think it's really the finishes that set these two apart. The Longrow is much rounder, it's much sweeter with like barley sugars and vanillas, and the Kilkerran gives us a lot more of that youthful sharpness. Also, it is the more peated of the two whiskeys, and that does come through particularly on the finish with more peat, more smoke, and more soot. Now, at this point in the review, I do want to kind of stop and step back and say these are both wonderful quality whiskeys, and the differences are not monumental. I'm just highlighting them because there are some. But as I said earlier, for the most part, these two are going to be for the same crowd. So pretty simple and pretty predictable conclusion here. One is going to be younger and louder. If that's more your speed, then buy that one. If you want something that's slightly more mature and rounder, then buy the Longrow. For score, Longrow, I'm going to give an 85, and the Kilkerran, I'm going to give an 84. Beautiful distillate in both of these, and I think if you're a peat head, you would go much higher. But keep in mind, peat is not my favorite genre, and I actually prefer all the other types of distillate from both Kilkerran and from Springbank. I tend to prefer the main Springbank line or the Hazelburn line over Longrow when it comes to Springbank, and when it comes to Glengyle, I prefer the age-stated Kilkerran range over the heavily peated stuff. So if you prefer the peated stuff, if you're a peat head, you can ignore me, but regardless, both of these are beautiful whiskeys. I do recommend both. Now, before we touch on value, I do want to say a quick thank you to all my channel members, all my patrons. Guys, thank you very much for the support, and if anyone else out there wants to help support the channel, I'll put Patreon and PayPal linked down below. Anything and everything helps. So yeah, let's talk about value here. All right, so for value, it is worth noting both of these are Springbank products, and depending on your market, you might have wild variations in prices for these. Here in Taiwan, the Longrow sells for about 75 US, and the Kilkerran I can get at its cheapest at around 60. Now, I do prefer the Longrow, but do I prefer it for $15 more? That's questionable. However, I do know that in some markets, these two are pretty much on par. I think in the UK, both of these are just under about 60 pounds. And if the price is exactly the same, I would lean more towards the Longrow, but I think both from a value standpoint are excellent and both are worth buying. And that brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. And of course, I want to hear from you. Have you tried either of these? Which batches of Kilkerran have you had? How would you compare it to the Longrow? What do they cost in your market? Let me know all of that down below. And finally, down below, you can also let me know what you want to see me review down the line, and I'll keep it in mind for my upcoming videos. Bye, guys.